will take you down!
Jake Harrison spat in Marcus and Michael's faces, his arrogant laughter echoing throughout the dojo, drowning the two newcomers in humiliation. Jake and Connor, the arrogant black belts, turned practice into a game. Their strikes were no longer training. They were punishments. Their bitter laughter cut deeper than any bruise, while the instructor deliberately turned his face away. In the opposite corner, Marcus and Michael Thompson, 14-year-old twins, stood in silence. Their fragile yellow belts made them look like nothing more than punching bags. But behind that frailty, their eyes burned with fire they would not stay down forever. Because out there in a dark garage, a father who had once been a soldier would teach them something entirely different, a way to fight back no one in this dojo could anticipate. And when the moment came, those who laughed today would be the first to fall. That afternoon, the last sunlight streamed through the dojo's glass windows, reflected 20 students in crisp white uniforms, belts of every color. Marcus and Michael Thompson entered the Warriors Path Karate Dojo with excitement mixed with unease. Sensei Robert Mitchell, 50 years old, imposing with a worn black belt, stopped beside the new twins. "Horse stance. Hold for 1 minute," he ordered. Their thighs burned, sweat dripped onto the cold wooden floor. But what made Marcus tremble wasn't only the strain, it was the mocking laughter from the corner. "Look at them," Jake sneered loud enough for all to hear. "Even monkeys can stand like that." Connor chimed in, "Maybe we should throw them bananas so they learn faster." The cruel laughter made Marcus's chest tighten. Michael, his twin, a mirror of his emotions, clenched his fists. They were twins, and one's humiliation was the other's wound. Sensei Mitchell, standing less than 3 meters away, seemed to deliberately ignore it. "Back straight. Power comes from the foundation," he said, as if nothing had happened. The resentment simmered, but the class went on. "It's time for sparring," the sensei clapped. Students paired up according to rank. But before the twins could find partners of their level, Jake and Connor approached smiles like predators closing in. "Newbies, let us show you some real moves," Connor said, his sugary tone dripping with contempt. Marcus started to step forward, but Michael grabbed his arm. The silent nod of his younger brother was their familiar signal. Endure, survive, and wait for the chance. "Bow to your opponent," Sensei called out. Marcus faced Connor while Michael squared off against Jake. Inside, both brothers told themselves, "Stay calm. Don't let the anger show." The word "begin" had barely left the sensei's mouth when Connor launched a side kick. It should have landed lightly, but instead it slammed into Marcus's ribs, knocking the air out of his lungs. He staggered while Connor feigned regret. "Oh, sorry. Yellow belts really are soft as noodles." On the mat beside them, Michael went down hard. Jake swept his legs, sending him crashing onto the freezing floor. "Stay down," Jake said, not bothering to offer a hand. "That's where you belong." In that moment, the twins understood this wasn't training. This was a declaration of war, and it was also the moment that planted the seed of a counterattack no one expected. Michael struggled to his feet, his face flushed with shame and fury. Marcus felt each blade of emotion cut into him too, because their twin bond made one's pain double in the other. The training session dragged on for another 10 tense minutes. Bruises began to spread across their bodies while Jake and Connor pretended to teach. "Maybe your dad should have signed you up for basketball instead." Connor mocked right after a deliberate elbow slammed into Marcus's shoulder. "We don't quit." Marcus gritted blood from his split lip spreading across his tongue. Jake shrugged and yanked Michael up roughly. "This dojo has standards. It's not a place for those who don't measure up." When practice ended, the twins quietly packed up, limping with each step, a silent admission they had been crushed. Around them, other students avoided eye contact, the silence in the room thick as stone walls. "Well done today." Sensei Mitchell's voice rang out solemn as if he hadn't seen a thing. "Martial arts build character through discipline and respect." Marcus and Michael glanced at each other, bitterness choking their chests. Those words cut like knives into the humiliation they had just endured. As they left class, Marcus caught sight of Jake and Connor by the equipment rack, whispering just loud enough to hear. They won't last a month. Their dad's probably in prison anyway. They should have known their place. Michael froze, his eyes darkening, his self-control cracking. Marcus saw the storm rising inside his brother. The familiar rumble of an engine echoed from the parking lot, cutting through the rising fury. David Thompson's pickup truck rolled in the father they both respected and feared. He stepped out carrying the rugged frame of a man who had served 8 years in the military, and then another decade and a half on construction sites. His stern black eyes instantly scanned every detail, the split lip, the bruised arm, the stiff, limping gait. How was class? His deep voice carried an authority that made lying difficult. Fine, they both answered in unison, as if rehearsed. But that perfect synchronization couldn't hide their worn-out bodies. David stayed silent for a few seconds, his gaze drilling into the cracks of their story. "Did you learn anything?" he asked. Marcus glanced at Michael, then replied briefly, but with heavy resolve. "Yes, we learned a lot." For the next 3 weeks, the pattern repeated. Every Tuesday and Thursday night, they entered the dojo with fresh determination, only to be crushed again under deliberate blows. Jake and Connor had turned helping the newbies into a public display of dominance before the entire class. That day, Sensei Mitchell announced, "Today we'll switch pairs. Advanced students will help beginners practice the basics." Marcus's heart sank when Jake's eyes locked onto his. The predator's grin returned. Christmas came early. Connor whispered just loud enough for a few to hear. At first, Jake played the model instructor. With parents watching behind the glass wall, he slowly explained blocking techniques, his tone gentle, like a devoted teacher. "Try again," Jake said, and Michael obeyed. But immediately, a follow-up strike slipped through the gap and slammed straight into Michael's solar plexus. He collapsed, gasping for air. "You dropped your guard." Jake shook his head, pretending to care. "In a real fight, you'd be dead from that mistake." Marcus moved to intervene, but Connor blocked him with a firm hand, a smile glued to his face. "Let your brother learn on his own. Or are you afraid he's too weak to handle it?" The taunt was a trap. Marcus knew refusing would mean abandoning Michael, but accepting meant enduring Connor's abuse. "I can take it," Marcus said, voice trembling but eyes steady. And the training began. 20 minutes later, Marcus's body was covered in bruises. Every correction from Connor came with a shove. Every adjustment included a kick or a throw. "You're too hot-headed," Connor mocked after sweeping him to the floor. "People like you always think violence solves everything. Martial arts is about control." The words were vague enough to deny if challenged, but sharp as a blade cutting into his pride. Marcus felt the fire of anger rising in his chest, the fire Michael had always helped him contain. But now Michael was being ground down too. Jake took every opportunity. Every technique ended with a throw or strike that sent Michael crashing to the mat. "Maybe you should try another sport," Jake smirked as he yanked Michael back up. "Basketball maybe, or running. Sounds more fitting." Michael's eyes blurred with pain, but his voice was quiet and firm. "I won't give up." That small spark in the darkness made Jake laugh before shoving him back to the mat, merciless. From near the reception desk, Sensei Mitchell watched with feigned satisfaction. When a few parents expressed concern about the intensity of the training, he simply smiled and explained traditional martial arts build character through adversity. Not everyone can endure it. When one mother suggested changing her child's partner, Mitchell shook his head. "Here we maintain high standards." By the end of class, Marcus and Michael sat in their father's pickup, their bodies wrapped in ice packs. The silence between them was heavy, a mixture of anger and helplessness. "Dad's going to find out sooner or later," Michael whispered, adjusting the pack against his bruised ribs. "We said we were learning," Marcus replied. "Learning what learning? We don't belong here." Marcus turned to him, voice firm. "We belong anywhere we want. No one gets to decide that for us." But those words of defiance did nothing to ease the ache in Michael's chest. 2 days later, David Thompson unexpectedly changed his routine. Instead of dropping them off, he walked into the dojo and declared he wanted to observe a class. His hardened military posture and sharp gaze immediately shifted the atmosphere. Jake and Connor suddenly became exemplary. Their words turned polished, their violent moves now hidden beneath the veneer of guidance. "You've improved a lot. Your father must be proud." Jake said to Michael, the word adapt tucked into the sentence like a knife disguised as praise. Connor patted Marcus on the shoulder. "You've learned to listen. Good. Everyone needs to know their place in the order." After class, David spoke with Mitchell. "They're diligent students," the instructor said. "They have potential, but they need to understand. Martial arts is also about fitting into the structure. They're taught to respect and work hard." David replied satisfied. The phrase "fitting into the structure" slid past him, but it fell like a stone into his sons' hearts. On the way home, David spoke with pride. "I see you're being well trained. Martial arts build character, teaching you to face hardship." "Yes, sir," the twins answered together, hiding their bitterness behind respectful voices. In their father's eyes, their tormentors were dedicated mentors. A parallel reality where humiliation was painted as guidance. That night in the dark room, for the first time, they spoke openly of what they had held in. "It's not getting better," Michael whispered. "Maybe we should tell Dad Marcus stayed silent for a long moment." Their father had always taught them to stand on their own, never give up, never run away. But how could they explain that the system itself was against them? "He won't believe us," Marcus sighed. He looks at Mitchell, at Jake, and Connor. Everything seems normal. Because they make it look normal. Michael fell silent, then his voice cut through the darkness, firm as a vow. "Then we have to get stronger until they can't do anything to us anymore. But they're black belts, and we're only yellow belts. We don't know how yet, but there has to be a way." Outside the window, the quiet suburban street glowed under the yellow lamps. Inside, the twins had made a silent decision, a vow no one else could hear, that the game would soon change. The Thompson home had once been a perfect picture of the American dream. A hard-working father, a mother keeping the household steady, and two 14-year-old sons carrying bright hopes for the future. But inside that small, dark room that night, the dream cracked. The brothers whispered to each other, plotting survival in a battle their father couldn't see, and their instructors deliberately ignored. The 8th week began like any other. Marcus and Michael tied their belts, tightly packed their gear, while David gulped down coffee before heading to the construction site. He had been working overtime for days, the dark circles under his eyes proof enough. "I'm free tonight. Want me to pick you up?" he asked. Marcus shook his head too quickly. "We can manage on our own." Michael added, "The cool air at night helps us unwind after class." David studied them carefully, suspicion flickering, then nodded. "Call me if you change your mind." At the dojo, class began with basic forms. The twins had secretly practiced at home with online videos, and their moves were sharper. "Today we practice multiple opponents," Sensei Mitchell announced. It was meant for advanced students, but somehow Marcus and Michael were called up as examples. Jake and Connor immediately volunteered, their eyes gleaming with a cruel delight only kids could recognize. "When you're surrounded, the rule is constant movement," Jake said, circling the twins with a fake smile. Then the lesson turned into 15 minutes of open torment. Connor swept Michael to the ground, then turned to the class. "See, instinct will betray you if you don't have technique." Marcus didn't even have time to help before Jake's knee rammed into his stomach, pinning him down. In real combat, you save yourself first. False shouts of instruction, mocking lessons filled the room while the twins' bodies were battered. When the bell finally rang, they staggered away, packing their gear like survivors of war faces, blank hearts torn apart. Outside, they froze. Their father's pickup truck was parked right in front. David had left a meeting early, hoping to surprise them. But what he saw through the glass was no joy, Jake and Connor laughing, mocking. They drop fast, fight like wild animals without discipline. David's blood went cold the instant he heard the word animals. When his son stepped outside, the dim yellow light revealed the truth. Marcus's lips split wide, Michael's GI torn at the shoulder, their halting steps betraying the blows to their ribs. With one look, David's 8 years of military instinct told him this wasn't training. It was systematic abuse. "Get in the truck," he said quietly, voice cold as steel. In the bright kitchen, the truth could no longer be denied. "How long?" he asked. Marcus hesitated, but David snapped. "How long?" Michael lowered his head. "Since the first day." The story spilled out 8 weeks of torment, while he himself had praised it as character building. "Mitchell saw all of it?" David asked. "He was right there," Marcus said bitterly. "But when you came, they put on a perfect show." David went silent, pacing like a man planning for war. "What now?" Michael asked. David stopped, eyes burning with resolve. "We'll give them one chance to set things right. Tomorrow I'll confront Mitchell directly." "And if he doesn't listen?" Marcus asked. David's smile was sharp, void of warmth. "Then we handle it ourselves." That night he dragged out the heavy punching bag and training mitts from the garage. If the system wouldn't protect his sons, he would forge them to protect themselves. The sound of fists slamming into canvas echoed into the night like a declaration of war. The next day, David strode into the dojo. Sensei Mitchell looked up from the front desk. "Polite Mr. Thompson, how can I help you? We need to talk about what's been happening to my sons," David said bluntly. Mitchell's face remained neutral, but his eyes flickered. "Of course, step into my office." As they walked toward the back, Jake and Connor glanced after them, the smirks fading into a flicker of unease. Inside the small office lined with plaques and tournament photos, the air of tradition turned into a battlefield. The real confrontation had begun. The cramped office reeked of old sweat and damp paper, its walls crowded with certificates, medals, and framed photos, the perfect kind of room to hide ugly truths behind masks of tradition and discipline. "Please have a seat," Sensei Mitchell said, voice calm, practiced for dealing with difficult parents. But David Thompson didn't sit. His broad, battle-hardened frame filled the tiny space. "My sons have been abused for 2 months in this class. They've been targeted, called racial slurs, beaten down by your black belt students. And you stood by." Mitchell's brow twitched, but his face quickly reset into professional concern. "I understand training can be harsh, especially for new students, but what you're describing doesn't reflect the program we teach here." David leaned in, his voice low and thunderous. "Jake Harrison and Connor Mills have turned this class into their dumping ground for hate. I heard them call my sons animals. Trash. You want to tell me that's training too?" For a moment, Mitchell's composure cracked. He glanced down at a stack of papers, stammered, "I wasn't aware of any inappropriate language." "You were less than 3 meters away," David cut him off, eyes blazing. "Don't insult my intelligence." The air thickened, the only sound the rustle of papers in Mitchell's nervous hands. "Perhaps we should find a middle ground," he said softly. "The Harrison and Mills families are important sponsors. They help keep tuition affordable for many students. And for that, you're willing to let my sons be punching bags," David growled. "I'm maintaining balance," Mitchell replied, his voice growing harder. "Perhaps your sons would be more comfortable in a different environment, one that fits their background better." David stepped closer to the desk, his whisper turning the air. "Ice-cold background, you mean their skin color?" Mitchell faltered. "I meant differences in how some adapt to traditional discipline." "Traditional discipline," David slammed his hand on the desk. "That's what you call 2 black belts breaking the ribs of yellow belts, while you pretend not to see." Mitchell shot to his feet, face flushed red. "Mr. Thompson, I have run this dojo for 15 years. I know the line between training and abuse. If your sons feel overwhelmed, they're not overwhelmed. They're being targeted. And if you don't end this, then this dojo is about to find out what truly being overwhelmed looks like." The silence that followed was like a live bomb. David turned to leave, but before stepping out the door, he stopped. "You have 1 day to fix this. Reassign partners, public discipline, stop the humiliation. If not," he smiled, cold as ice, "I'll handle it myself." Back in the main hall, class was beginning. David glanced through the glass, his son still warming up, moving cautiously with fresh bruises. Across the room, Jake and Connor still grinned smugly, as if they owned the place. Only David and Mitchell knew the board had shifted. That evening at home, Marcus and Michael worked on homework, but kept glancing at the clock. "What do you think, Dad said?" Michael whispered. Exactly what needed to be said. Marcus answered, though the tight grip on his pencil betrayed his anxiety. "What if it gets worse?" Michael asked. Marcus lifted his gaze, eyes blazing. "Worse, they've already tried to crush us every class." The front door opened. David stepped in posture, straight face set like iron. "Well, Dad?" Marcus asked, his voice tight. No words were needed. One look told them the battle had entered a new phase. David hung his keys on the hook, then sat beside his sons. His face still carried the tension of a man who had just confronted an ugly truth. "Mitchell cares more about his sponsors' wallets than his students," he said flatly. "He knows what's happening and admitted he's not going to stop it." The silence hung heavy until Michael spoke. "So, what do we do now?" David looked at the faces before him, reflections of his own stubbornness and their mother's integrity. He knew they would never bow to injustice. "Now we prepare for when words mean nothing. If the system won't protect you, then I'll teach you to protect yourselves." That promise burned like a flame in the dark, fear mixed with excitement. "You mean fight back?" Marcus asked, though deep down he already knew the answer. "I mean survive," David said, voice sharp as steel, "so no one can lay hands on you without paying the price." That night the family garage became a battlefield. David backed the pickup outside, hung an old heavy bag from the rafters, cleared away toolboxes. The yellow light cast the space into a secret dojo. "Your mother doesn't need to know about this yet," he instructed. "For now, this stays between us." Marcus swallowed hard. "What are you going to teach us?" David clenched his fists, the corner of his mouth rising. "Everything I learned in 8 years of service. Things they'll never teach in a polished dojo." "This is real fighting." Michael frowned. "Is it even legal?" "Self-defense is always legal, and after what I saw with my own eyes, anything you do to protect yourselves is justified." The first lesson began immediately. David wrapped cloth around his hands, dropped into a low, fluid stance, nothing like the rigid poses of the dojo. "In the Army, we don't perform. We eliminate threats quickly. Fancy moves are useless. Finishing blows save lives." The bag shuddered as Marcus landed his first punch. David corrected lower. "Faster. Aim for weak points, solar plexus, throat, knees. When Connor grabs you, don't try to escape. Use the closeness to strike back." Michael bit his lip. "What if we get punished?" David gave a harsh laugh. "Punished for standing up to bullies. Let's see how they explain that to your mother." Within an hour, the trembling victims began to transform into fighters learning to take control. No more practice enduring this was training to strike back. The small garage became a forge where fear melted into resolve. Meanwhile, across town, a very different scene played out. In the brightly lit dining room of the Harrison home, the clink of silverware rang steadily. Richard Harrison, a successful insurance executive, cut into his steak and asked Sensei Mitchell mentioned some new students having trouble adapting. "Do you know anything about the tune?" Jake smiled smoothly, the perfect picture of a model student. "There's a pair of twins struggling with discipline. Sometimes they even show disrespect to senior students." "That doesn't sound good," his mother frowned. "Not everyone's cut out for traditional martial arts," Richard added. "It builds real character, not a game." Jake nodded, voice sweet as honey. "Exactly. Some people simply can't handle it." They all smiled, satisfied with a story that fit perfectly into their beliefs, while across town, 2 battered boys were pounding away at a heavy bag, secretly preparing for the day of reckoning. In the dim garage, fists thundered against canvas like war drums. David circled his son's eyes sharp. "They'll use their black belts and their size to intimidate. But remember, size means nothing if you're faster and hit harder than they expect." He demonstrated a sequence: close the distance, unleash strikes at multiple weak points, then disengage to reset. No move was beautiful, only lethal, efficient, cold. This isn't about becoming better martial artists than them. This is about becoming better survivors. Marcus launched a flurry of punches, the sharp cracks echoing as he felt for the first time in months real strength instead of helplessness. "That's it," David urged. "Add the knee strike. Don't give them a chance to breathe." Across the garage, Michael advanced quickly too. His analytical mind read openings while his bottled-up rage became fuel for each strike. When training ended, sweat dripped onto the cement floor worn smooth by countless footsteps. "At the dojo, you keep acting normal," David instructed. "It's not time to reveal anything yet." Marcus frowned. Then when David's smile was thin as a blade, "When the moment comes, and trust me, it will come." The next night at the dojo, the torment continued, but something had shifted. Marcus and Michael no longer reacted in bursts of anger. They took the blows, endured the insults, but their eyes were different now, clear calculating. Connor tilted his chin arrogantly. "You're getting good at taking hits. Guess you're starting to know your place," Marcus replied flatly. "We've been learning a lot. During the water break, Jake studied them. They're not snapping like they used to." Connor shrugged. "They'll quit soon enough." But the truth was the opposite. In their minds, the twins were memorizing every habit, every weakness, preparing for the moment to strike back. Meanwhile, Mitchell began to feel the pressure. David's warning haunted him. After class, he pulled Jake and Connor aside. "Be more careful with the Thompsons. Their father's already complained. Don't leave anyone room to accuse you." Connor frowned. "You mean, go easy on them?" Mitchell shook his head. "No. Same as before, just discreet." The bullies exchanged a glance and grinned. The game had just become even more thrilling. Keep tormenting, but hide it behind the mask of legitimate training. On the way home, Michael whispered, "They'll be more careful from now on." Marcus answered, "The more careful, the more predictable. And predictable means easier to prepare for." That night, the garage rang with the pounding of the heavy bag again. But now the drills were sharper, countering Jake's favorite kicks, breaking Connor's leg sweeps, exploiting the habits of bullies too convinced of their own invincibility. David watched every move closely. "They think you're just yellow belts. But when the time comes, you'll fight like soldiers." 4 weeks passed. The garage became a battlefield forge, the heavy bag's canvas tearing the concrete floor dark with shoe marks. Marcus's body hardened, Michael's eyes sharpened. They were no longer cornered boys. They were predators waiting for the moment to rip apart the chain of humiliation. One evening, David set a martial arts magazine on the table, a bold ad for the Tri-County Open flashing across the page. "Tomorrow's the registration deadline. It's time to decide." Marcus, sweat still dripping, didn't hesitate. "I'm ready." Michael studied the flyer, brow furrowed. "It says here we can only fight in the yellow belt division." David cut him off, his voice low but firm. "No, you'll enter the open division. That's where all ranks face each other." Marcus's eyes widened. "Open? You mean even black belts?" David nodded, his smile cold as a command in battle. "Exactly. If we're ending this, we end it on the biggest stage." The chains of the heavy bag creaked, echoing the weight of the decision. "You're not just protecting yourselves," David said, eyes drilling into his sons. "You're going to force that dojo and this whole town to see you differently." Marcus clenched his fists, remembering every humiliating practice. "We're not the same kids anymore." Michael nodded slowly, still hesitant. "But what if we lose? What if 4 weeks isn't enough?" David set a firm hand on his shoulder, voice unshakable. "They've studied karate for years, but you've been learning how to fight. There's a difference." That night in their dark bedroom, heavy thoughts filled the silence. "Dad's turning us into weapons," Michael whispered. "How's that any different from them?" Marcus rolled on his pillow. "It's different. They use strength to crush. We use it to stand back up." The silence between them was heavy as lead, but their resolve only grew stronger. The 3 weeks that followed became a crucible. The garage turned into a forge of willpower. Fists cracked like fire sweat, pooled on the cement, hands bled, but eyes burned brighter. They were no longer victims. They were warriors waiting for the day the truth would be exposed. Then the morning of the tournament came. The Millbrook Community Center was packed. Banners from different dojos lined the walls. Names echoed across the loudspeaker. Marcus and Michael sat by the registration table, their yellow belts stark against the sea of brown and black. Thompson, Marcus, and Michael, the coordinator, asked, checking the clipboard, "You're sure you want the open division? There's a yellow belt bracket more suited for you." "We're sure," Marcus answered, his voice trembling inside, but steady outside. Michael swallowed hard. Behind them, David stood, eyes cold as steel. Across the hall, Jake and Connor warmed up with the Warriors' Path group. Black belts tied tight smirks on their faces. "Look at that!" Connor laughed loudly for all to hear. "This is gonna be fun." Jake glanced over, lips curling. Pitiful. Almost makes me feel sorry for them. Almost. Sensei Mitchell walked up, his face a mix of surprise and unease. "Mr. Thompson, I didn't know your sons were competing today." David's reply was short, or cold. "There's a lot you don't know. Ring 3 Open Division, Connor Mills versus Michael Thompson." The loudspeaker boomed. The whole hall erupted, the matchup between a seasoned black belt and a yellow belt novice, drawing half anticipation, half mockery. Michael stepped onto the mat. Marcus stood outside, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles went white. David crossed his arms, eyes locked on his son. The battle they had waited for over 2 months was finally beginning. David let the chorus of accusations thunder around him as though it were distant storm. He stood tall, calm in posture, but his gaze carried the weight of a man who had seen real battlefields. "You're saying my sons cheated only because they dared to win?" His deep voice was cold but carried clearly enough for the whole hall to hear. Richard Harrison jabbed a trembling finger forward. "Impossible. No yellow belt can fight like that. It's absolutely impossible." The head referee of the tournament, an old man with 40 years in the profession, raised a hand. "Enough. I know what cheating looks like. These two fought clean. If they trained extra at home, that's called effort, not fraud." Sensei Mitchell's face flushed crimson, his reputation unraveling in real time. "You don't understand. Those boys were weak, clumsy, useless before. How could just 2 months—" Michael stepped forward, chest still heaving, but his voice steady. "Maybe you didn't see it, because you never looked at us as students. You only ever saw us as punching bags for others to vent on." The hall fell silent. Parents who had heard rumors began whispering to each other, suspicion flickering across their faces. Marcus came to stand beside his brother. "We didn't cheat. We learned the hard way. Every bruise, every insult, every night we limped home from the dojo. We turned it all into lessons." "And you never saw it coming." The air cracked like thunder. Jake and Connor went pale, their fury helpless. The words of Michael and Marcus hit harder than any strike. Richard flailed, desperate to recover. "This is disgraceful. My son has been humiliated in front of everyone." For the first time, David let his steel edge cut through his voice. "No, Richard. Your son humiliated himself the moment he thought he could measure another person's worth by their skin color or by the belt around their waist." The hall erupted. Some parents nodded in agreement, others muttered angrily. Amid the storm of voices, the Thompson brothers stood taller than ever before. This fight was no longer just a match. It was the opening act of a reckoning. And from here, there would be no turning back. "Maybe your son isn't as good as you thought," David said low and sharp, the words hitting like a punch to the chest. Richard and Bill both recoiled, faces flushed with rage. The thought that their perfect, superior sons had truly lost to the very boys they had scorned was intolerable. "We know what we saw," Richard roared. "Those boys deliberately shamed Jake and Connor. They rubbed their faces in the dirt in front of everyone. Or maybe Jake and Connor were just weak and stupid all along," Marcus said quietly, suddenly at his father's side. The words split the air like lightning. Jake Harrison let out a strangled scream, lunging at Marcus, but tournament security jumped in. "Enough!" The tournament director barked, voice severe. "The matches were fair. The results stand." When the Thompson brothers accepted their certificates of victory and prepared to leave, the atmosphere was thick tense as a drawn bowstring. For Jake and Connor, the loss was more than defeat. It was public humiliation, planting a grudge that would not fade easily. As the Thompsons made their way toward the exit, suddenly Jake and Connor broke free from their parents' grip, rushing from behind. Their eyes were bloodshot with tears of rage, their faces twisted with fury and despair. "Hey, Jake," shouted a voice cracking. Marcus and Michael turned, still high on the rush of triumph, but not yet recognizing the dangerous desperation in their rivals' eyes. "You think you're so great," Connor screamed, stepping closer. "Think you proved something today?" "We proved we're better than you," Marcus replied, his confidence making him drop his guard. That was the trigger Jake and Connor needed. Their masks shattered. Connor swung wildly, his fist crashing toward Michael's head, while Jake lunged like a wild animal, tackling Marcus to the ground. Chaos exploded. Screams filled the arena as the Thompson brothers hit the floor, but instinct from the garage training snapped alive. Marcus rolled clear of Jake's flailing fists, springing back into a guard. Michael absorbed the first blows, then delivered a crushing uppercut that sent Connor's staggering vision swimming. "You want a real fight?" Marcus roared, his voice ragged with fire. "Then let's fight." The brawl erupted, no rules, no bowing, no formality. This wasn't karate anymore. It was street combat. Marcus unleashed a barrage straight into Jake's face, splitting his lip, blood spilling fast. Michael hammered precise blows into Connor's body, each strike echoing the drills their father had burned into their memory. "Stop this! Stop it now!" The tournament director's voice rang out, lost under the stampede of panicked spectators. Jake hurled himself recklessly again, but Marcus dodged, slamming his knee into his ribs, the crack of bone sharp and brutal. Connor staggered forward with a clumsy swing, only to be dropped by Michael's hook, his body crashing into folding chairs, collapsing limp. At last, security wrestled the four apart. Jake and Connor dripped with blood, black belts torn, their GI smeared red. The Thompson brothers still stood gasping for breath, but bearing only light bruises despite the ambush. "What happened here?" the tournament director thundered, face blazing with rage and humiliation. "They jumped us," Michael said, wiping blood from his lip. "We were just walking out when they attacked." "That's a lie," Jake rasped through a broken nose. "They started it. They provoked us. By beating you fair and square." Marcus shot back, voice like a knife. David Thompson pushed through the crowd, his face carved from steel, as he checked his sons quickly. They were standing conscious yet ambushed after a public victory, and his blood boiled. "You boys all right?" he asked. "We're fine, Dad," Marcus panted. "Better than they are." Richard Harrison and Bill Mills rushed forward, faces flickering between worry and rage. Jake and Connor looked like they had been crushed both in body and in pride. "This is assault," Richard shouted, jabbing a finger at the Thompson brothers. "They attacked my sons after your sons ambushed mine from behind," David replied, his voice low but chilling. "In front of hundreds of witnesses." The tournament director glanced at the security team and the crowd of spectators. The deliberation lasted only seconds before his voice rang out decisive. "Jake Harrison and Connor Mills are disqualified and banned from all future regional tournaments. Attacking opponents after a match is unacceptable." "What about them?" Bill Mills bellowed, pointing at Marcus and Michael. "They defended themselves from a surprise attack. That's not only legal, it's obvious." The crowd erupted in whispers, and amid the sea of faces, the Thompson brothers stood tall, unyielding. They hadn't just won in the ring. They had exposed the truth buried for 2 months. The ruling hit Warriors' path like a thunderclap. Their 2 stars hadn't just lost. They were disgraced, banned, humiliated in front of the martial arts community. "This is absurd." "There must be some mistake," Sensei Mitchell shouted. "The only mistake was letting those boys represent your dojo," the director snapped coldly. "Perhaps you should reevaluate your training methods." When medics rushed in, the damage was plain Jake with a broken nose, split lip, bruised ribs. Connor with a swollen black eye cut streaked across his face, clutching his injured arm. Both needed hospital care. Meanwhile, the Thompson brothers bore only minor scrapes, a clear mark of those secret garage nights with their father training not just for fair matches, but for dirty ambushes too. "We'll sue them," Richard hissed to his wife. David cut in his voice like steel. "Good luck. 100 witnesses saw your son strike first." The Harrisons and Mills huddled seething, realizing their sons' martial arts careers were over. "This isn't over," Richard growled at David. "It is. For your boys, it's finished. They made their choice the moment they jumped mine from behind," David answered, eyes unblinking. News spread instantly. 2 yellow belts defeated black belts in open competition and crushed them again in a chaotic brawl right after. The town buzzed. Yet, beneath the Thompsons' pride lingered a heavy foreboding. On the ride home, Michael whispered, "Dad, people looked at us differently. Scary different. People can't stand when their illusions shatter," David said, eyes fixed on the road. "Especially when those illusions are their children." "What will they do now?" Marcus asked. David was silent a moment, then muttered, "Nothing smart. Anger rarely breeds wisdom." But once home, instead of celebrating, David checked every lock, armed the security system. His military instincts screamed tonight wasn't the end. Across town in the Harrisons' lavish living room, rage boiled over. "We can't let this stand. My son's disgraced band careers destroyed in one afternoon," Richard roared, pacing like a caged tiger. "They cheated," Connor muttered, his eye swollen shut. "Yellow belts can't fight like that. Impossible." "Exactly," Bill Mills nodded grimly. "Something's wrong, and it has to be corrected." As night deepened, anger hardened into planning. A plan no longer about tournaments, but about a private conversation concerning respect and consequences. 10:00 p.m. 2 cars rolled silently to a stop at the end of the Thompson Street. The house glowed warmly inside, the picture of family life, yet outside the dark brimmed with menace. "Who's calling this late?" Lisa Thompson asked, hands still in the sink. David peered through the window, parting the curtain. Richard Harrison and Bill Mills stood outside, still in their day clothes, eyes burning with hatred. "Stay inside," David told his wife, his voice hard as an order. "Take the boys upstairs. Now." "What's happening?" Lisa asked, worried. "Nothing I can't handle. Just do it." The bell rang again, faster, sharper. Then came pounding fists, reverberating through the house. David cracked the door, keeping the chain locked, leaving only a 4-inch gap. "Evening, gentlemen. Bit late for social calls. Don't you think we need to talk?" Richard snarled. "About what your boys did today. Your boys ambushed mine, lost in fairness, disgraced themselves in cowardice. What's left to discuss?" "Cut the crap," Bill growled, stepping closer. "Open the door, Thompson. We're not talking through a crack. Actually, there's nothing to talk about. It's nearly 11. You're on my property, uninvited, in a state of bloodlust. So here's what you'll do, leave." David started to close the door, but Richard Harrison slammed his shoulder into it, holding it open. "Do you know how much money we've invested in our sons?" Richard snarled through the narrow crack of the door. 7 years of tuition tournaments, summer camps, equipment, tens of thousands of dollars. And in one afternoon, your boys destroyed all of it. Your money only bought arrogance and bullies." David replied flatly. "That's not my fault. Jake had full ride scholarship offers from colleges." Bill Mills shouted, desperate. "Then he should have thought twice before jumping my sons from behind. Your boys are the ones who should be banned." Richard roared. "Yellow belts fighting like that, it's obviously a fraud, no. My boys won fair and square. It's your sons who turned their titles into a farce." The 2 men exchanged a glance, hatred blazing hotter as David remained calm, unshaken. "We want compensation," Bill Mills snapped suddenly. "Money. You'll pay for what your boys ruined." David barked out a dry laugh, sharp as a blade. "Compensation for what? For your sons learning that bullies eventually pay for your illusion of superiority shattered enough." Richard slammed his fist against the door. "Open it. We'll settle this like men." Settling it, David said coldly, "means you leaving my property before I call the police." "Call them," Bill Mills yelled. We'll tell them you trained illegally, turned your kids into weapons. Then I'll tell them about months of racial slurs and beatings right in front of your dojo. Let's see whose story gets believed." David unhooked the chain and stepped fully onto the porch, closing the door behind him. Richard and Bill immediately spread out, forming a pincer. "You think serving in the military makes you tough," Richard sneered. "I don't think anything David said. I know one thing, I raised my sons better than you did." "Our boys are champions," Bill Mills screamed. "No, they're bullies who lost to 2 kids you thought were beneath them." The words landed like a punch to the gut. Both men's faces turned crimson, eyes blazing. "You've ruined them," Richard rasped, voice breaking. "Scholarships, futures, all gone because you couldn't teach your sons to stay in their place." "Place?" David's voice dropped dark as a drawn blade. "And where exactly do you think that is?" Bill Mills stepped close, spitting out the naked truth you know damn well. The racist undertone hung heavy in the air. David was ready. His mind assessed the situation with a lightning precision. 2 civilians angry, untrained. "This is your last chance to walk away," he warned. "We're not going anywhere," Richard bellowed, swinging a clumsy punch. David slipped aside, countering with a sharp strike to the solar plexus. Richard collapsed to his knees, gasping. Bill lunged, arms flailing. David locked his wrist, redirected his momentum, and hurled him hard into the porch railing. "Stay down," David ordered, but both staggered back up, only to be dropped again. Richard caught a brutal elbow, blood spurting from his nose. Bill hit the deck, face first, David's knee pinning him down. "Had enough?" David asked, breath steady, but eyes blazing with control. "This isn't over," Richard wheezed, blood streaming. "It's over," David said, releasing Bill. "Your boys are banned. Your money's gone. And now you know what happens when you bring hate to my doorstep." Sirens wailed, cutting through the night. Red and blue lights washed over the quiet neighborhood as a patrol car pulled onto Maple Street, stopping in front of the Thompson home. A female officer stepped out, hand resting casually on her holster, eyes scanning the scene. 2 bloodied men, a veteran standing, tall hands visible. "Someone call in a disturbance?" she asked. "I did," David replied, his voice calm again. "These 2 showed up at my house near midnight, threatening my family. When I asked them to leave, they attacked me." "That's a lie," Richard shouted, pressing tissues to his bleeding nose. "He attacked us. We just came to talk, and he jumped us." Officer Martinez glanced around. David stood steady, composed, every inch in control. The other 2, bloody, disheveled, looked like men who'd brought disaster on themselves. Minutes later, Richard and Bill sat slumped in the back of the patrol car, their faces swollen and stained with blood. The citation, trespassing and disturbing the peace, was a damning verdict on their arrogance. David stood on the porch, posture calm like a soldier after duty. Officer Martinez approached and gave him a small nod. "You handled it well, but I'd recommend adding cameras, maybe varying your routines. People holding grudges don't always think straight. I've already considered that." David said, voice low but resolute. "Thank you for coming in time." Inside the house, Marcus and Michael pressed close to their bedroom window, peering out at the front lawn. The red and blue patrol lights washed across their father's face, strange, unfamiliar, yet something to be proud of. "Dad's okay now," Marcus whispered with relief. "Better than okay," Michael added, eyes fixed on the 2 once proud bullies now being shoved into the back of a police car. "Looks like their fathers just learned the same lesson their sons did." Lisa stood in the doorway, arms folded, her face torn between a mother's worry and a wife's steadfast trust in her veteran husband. "Your dad always knows how to handle things," she said softly. When the cruisers rolled away, Maple Street sank back into its usual quiet. The night wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of damp leaves. David glanced back at his boys and saw that in their eyes there was no longer the fear of bullied children, but the steel of those who had endured the fire and come out stronger. "It's over now, right, Dad?" Michael asked, hope mingling with exhaustion. "It's over," David answered firmly. In that moment, the family understood the battle hadn't ended with one match or a single brawl. It had closed a chapter of scorn and oppression, opening a new one, where they were no longer victims, but people who could defend themselves, who could stand tall beneath any contemptuous gaze. 6 weeks after the tournament, the Warriors' Path Dojo was nothing but hollow echoes. Sensei Robert Mitchell sat packing trophies and black belts into cardboard boxes, moving with the slowness of a man who knew his career was in ruins. The investigation by the Regional Martial Arts Federation had been swift and thorough. Testimonies from parents, students, and witnesses painted an undeniable picture: systemic bullying tolerated by a teacher who valued sponsorship money over student safety. Mitchell's teaching credentials were revoked. The dojo lost its license forever. 30 members canceled in 2 weeks. 15 years of work gone, he muttered, voice breaking with bitterness. Across town, the atmosphere was entirely different. At Integrity Martial Arts Academy, the new dojo opened by Marine veteran Master Chen, the Thompson twins were now helping younger students with basic drills. Remember, Marcus smiled at an 8-year-old white belt. Martial arts is for protecting yourself and others, never for bullying. Exactly, Master Chen nodded. These two understand the true meaning of martial arts. Strength is for shielding, not for crushing. Rumors spread through town. At Millbrook High, the story of the twins who had once been bullied became legend. The Thompson brothers' victims turned conquerors of the town's most arrogant fighters, exposing a greedy dojo. Jake Harrison now worked part-time at his father's insurance office, avoiding the scornful stares of classmates. Connor Mills withdrew, studying online from home. Their fathers, Richard Harrison and Bill Mills, lost credibility in their businesses. Clients turned away. Careers slid into decline after the scandal. One evening, walking home from the new dojo, Michael grinned at his brother. Funny, we're famous just for fighting. Everyone wants to hear the story again. Better famous for fighting back than for getting beaten up, Marcus quipped, and both laughed. Back in the Thompson garage, David tightened the final security camera into place. He paused when his sons came in, faces glowing after class. "How was practice?" he asked. "Master Chen says we might test for Greenbelt by Christmas," Michael replied. "More importantly," Marcus added, "we helped 3 new kids today. No one's getting bullied at the new dojo." David nodded, a quiet swell of pride rising in him. The journey had come full circle. From beaten-down boys, his sons had become protectors, ready to make sure no one else suffered what they had. Lisa stepped out from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron, eyes shining with both pride and caution. "Any news about the old dojo?" she asked. "Closed for good." By the end of the month, David answered simply. Silence settled for a moment. Then David placed his hands on his son's shoulders, looking them straight in the eye. "People know now. They know you're not victims anymore. They know no one pushes this family around. And most of all, they know every action carries consequences." Marcus nodded. "We didn't start the fight, but if someone brings it to us, we'll finish it." David smiled. "Exactly. But remember, we don't go looking for trouble. We just make sure we're strong enough so trouble never comes knocking again." Outside, Maple Street returned to its peaceful calm. But inside the Thompson home, a new truth was carved. Deep strength was not just muscle. It was the courage to stand tall, to face injustice, and to protect what was right. Mitchell tried selling off all his dojo equipment, but few wanted anything tied to a disgraced name. "What about Jake and Connor?" Michael asked one night. "They don't matter anymore," Marcus answered firmly. "They're banned until they're 18. And even if they come back, the stain on their names will follow forever." The unfinished thought was interrupted by a knock at the door. Though the Thompsons were cautious now, this visitor was different. On the porch stood Master Chen, holding a brown envelope, his warm smile carrying good news. "I wanted to deliver this personally," he said, handing it to David. Inside was a certificate promoting Marcus and Michael to Orange Belt, and another surprise, an invitation from the State Martial Arts Association asking the twins to join a youth leadership program to help train teachers in anti-bullying techniques. "Your story has already drawn attention at the state level," Master Chen explained. Other dojos want to learn how to prevent what happened at Warrior's Path from ever happening again. The twins exchanged a glance, silent but filled with mutual resolve. From bullied children, they were now being invited to become guides protectors for others who could not yet defend themselves. "We're honored," Michael answered for them both. When Master Chen left, the family gathered around the dinner table. David asked, "Are you proud of what you've done?" "I'm proud we never gave up," Marcus said. "Proud we proved we belong anywhere," Michael added. "And proud that now we can help other kids never go through what we did, both finish together. Underscore, 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 underscore. Outro. Outside the town of Millbrook seemed calm as ever, but the balance had shifted completely. The bullies defeated the greedy teacher, stripped of everything, while the boys, once marked as easy targets, now stood as shining examples in their community. While Jake and Connor and their parents sank in disgrace, Marcus and Michael Thompson proved a simple, powerful truth. Real strength doesn't lie in belt colors or reputation. It lies in the courage to stand against injustice and defend human dignity. This was more than a victory in the ring. It was justice triumphing over arrogance, willpower triumphing over oppression. And most of all, it was a reminder that every action sooner or later carries its price. And what about you? If you were in Marcus and Michael's place, would you find the courage to stand up for yourself and for the ones you love? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for following this story. If you found it meaningful, please hit like and subscribe so you won't miss the next videos. While you wait, I've already picked 2 more stories I know you'll enjoy. Until then, see you soon, and may you have a truly wonderful day.